could at least show the patient what they would be able to do with that additional support. And again, there's no sense in, you can work on some mild neck exercises if they have 3/5 in terms of neck extension. But why have them hold up a 12 to 15 pound head all day long when you could get that support and get them into a neutral position and much more functional? So that's where we get into that compensatory stuff really early on. So addressing that neck would be a big thing too. And then working on gait training as far as clearing those toes. The AFOs are on their way. Typically with an ALS patient to start out, they're going to do best with just a continuous gait, and probably they're not going to have, they're in pretty good shape as far as central stability and strength, and so they're going to do fine in terms of balance using a wheeled walker. So to start with, that's probably going to be their best bet. And just trying to work on them getting an adequate heel strike. And if they aren't going to get AFOs, if they're going to be too heavy and they opted out or the doctor didn't order them or whatever, to actually get to the point where you might promote a little bit of a high steppage gait. In other words, lift the whole foot up. If the ankle is dropping and the toes are curling under, to just clear a little bit with a high steppage gait so that they're able to safely ambulate with the wheeled walker. The wheeled walker is just going to kind of even them up a little bit, give them a little support as they're lifting their legs through to provide gait. Then with our Parkinson's patient, everything's going to be small. And there's going to be flexion at the hips, flexion at the knees, probably too much dorsiflexion. Feet are going to be together. They're going to be curved. The head's going to be down. The shoulders are going to be forward. And so what you want to do is big. You want to make them big. So do you just jerk them out of the chair and put them right on the walker? Not the best idea. When gait training is in my plan of care for this patient for today, try to do that towards the end. Try to do some other stuff first, because then you're going to have a better quality of gait. If a pool is available to you, they're going to take much bigger steps when they get into the pool. They're supported by the water, and it's like all that rigidity goes away. And you just say giant steps, and then have them do that visualization. When you're not around, say, think about what we talk about with making your movements big. You can get a mirror out. You can use a marker on the mirror. Have the patient sitting in a chair or a wheelchair right in front of here. Use the mirror. Maybe put a spot up here, a spot up here, spot up here. Have them reach up and put X's in those spots. They can see themselves in the mirror. They can see their posture. They can do some self-correction, which they'll be able to do. And they'll be able to do a reaching activity with some type of a goal. So having them work in front of a mirror is very beneficial. Setting the mirror down to the end and saying, I want you to look in the mirror while you walk, accomplishes a lot of things. Gives them an idea on where they are in space in terms of their posturing, and it gets them looking up, so that they're looking up while they're walking towards you. So, it just started out on one side for a while. It wasn't too bad, but then it got to the point where I had trouble rolling. I had trouble pulling my chair up to the table. I had trouble getting in and out of the car. I had trouble taking big steps. I had trouble with people taking me seriously because my expressions don't change anymore. I had trouble with people thinking that I'm okay in the head. And I think the worst part is just in the morning, I just feel like a brick and I can't move. But the therapist showed me how to do some rotation and stuff, and that has helped a great deal. So I try to think about doing that before I get up in the morning. It's difficult, but because I can tell it's getting worse and the medicines aren't working as well, I've been taking L-Dopa for about 5 years now, and they say that's about the extent of how it's going to work, and then it's going to stop working. They've tried me on other things, but I just keep getting worse. So they just keep telling me, think big, and where I'm bent, they want me to be straighter, and where I pull in, they want me to pull out, but sometimes it's hard for me to remember, and it's hard for me to follow through. So if I'm like this in the morning, it's going to be best for me to really get to the point where I get all stretched out. So what I do is I spend a lot of time in the morning just doing some of that in the bed before I get up. So that patient would be very rigid, and it could even affect breathing and everything else. And so to really have them work on rotation is helpful. Have them work on rotation with the upper body is helpful. To combine the two and go in opposite directions is helpful. And work on just doing things in part, like coming over onto the elbow and then back again. That gets weight bearing through the joints and helps to inhibit the rigidity. And then all the rotation helps to reduce the rigidity in the hips and in the shoulders and also in the trunk area. And so all of that is very helpful. If you're working on getting them up from a sitting position, it's real important to have them do it on the first try, because that's going to be a difficult thing. So what you want to do is have them do whatever it's going to take, get to the edge, push off from the edge, do some rocking if that's necessary, which is going to reduce some of that rigidity and tone, and have them do that. A good exercise to do with Parkinson's patients, and we've gone over this before, is partial stands, where they come to this position and hold it and come back down. It's similar to like doing a wall squat, but it kind of works everything. That accomplishes approximation, which is going to help with the rigidity. That helps with strengthening for the lower extremities. So to come up and partially stand and then go back down, that's going to eventually help them to get up from a seated position better. Anytime that you can encourage them about their home and getting sitting on higher surfaces and more firm surfaces at home, they're going to be much more able to get up out of a firm higher surface than they are a cushy lower surface. And so many of the couches that you see in older people's homes are like they've had them for 50 years and there's just no body left to the cushions at all, and you know, you sit down and you're practically on the floor. It's very, very difficult to get up from that position. So even if you can recommend to family members to put runners underneath to bring those up, or just to encourage that patient to sit in a higher chair, is going to be very, very beneficial. That's going to help out a whole lot. Let's see. Once you get them into a standing position, to then work on it with a mirror in front of them perhaps, but try to get everything just as straight as possible. You can work on them standing against the wall and have them feel the wall behind them, get their hips against the wall, and then say, okay, now I want your shoulder blades against the wall, now your shoulders, and now your head. And that's the way I want you to stand. Take a couple of steps away, and I want you to hold that position, and that's the way you should be. Have a mirror in front of them for that. That's a good thing to do too. Mirrors are great in neuro for the most part. Some things, sometimes it can kind of work against you. But for the most part, a mirror can be very helpful with working with patients. So with the Parkinson's disease, you want the wheeled walker in front of them. The wheeled walker is going to probably be the best option, because the wheeled walker is going to help them to be able to take continuous steps and not get all mired down in that real fascinating gait. So to really encourage them to use that wheeled walker to take long steps, to keep their steps within the confines of that walker, and just have them do a whole lot of practice that way, and to try to carry that through when they're doing other activities at home as well with the wheeled walker. So that's an important consideration too. In terms of inhibition with the tone, you can also work on different joint surfaces. You know, if you see that there's more rigidity in the arms and legs, even when you did some rotation on the mat, to just do a modified plank and shift weight back and forth. You can bend the knees a little bit and come over from one side to the other, and that can provide a little bit of strengthening. But putting weight through those extremities can be very helpful too. Feeding the joints and providing a little bit of approximation can be helpful too. But looking back over those lists that we went over so long ago of different things that you can do to inhibit and facilitate would be good things to do to prepare for this lab practical. With facilitate, yeah.
Can you do weight shifts like maybe on the Bosu ball? I mean, of course, where you're guarding, what you know, the therapist is guarding, but like shifting from each side without them touching anything to.
And that, yeah, that's a good idea.
For perception and
Yeah.
maybe doing this.
Yeah. Sometimes a bean is a little bit easier. It just depends on the patient and how stable they are. But to sit in the curved part of that bean is much more supportive. But sitting on a Swiss ball, just so you're there guarding them, will help. You can do a whole lot on the Swiss ball, on the stability ball, in terms of anterior and posterior tilts, because they will tend to be locked into that posterior tilt. So you roll them forward and they're going to go into that anterior tilt. So they get that shifting back and forth, very similar to what you get in horseback riding, that kind of pelvic shift. So that can be helpful as well. With other things that you can do in terms of upper extremity and lower extremity is, again, just trying to get those extremities, thinking about getting those extremities as far away from the center as possible. So again, everything is small and you're trying to make everything big. So doing a lot of reaching, and not just reaching that they just have to move their arm, reaching so that they get their trunk involved as well. Reaching so that they have to cross the center line are important considerations as well. So all of those things that you need to keep in mind when you're working with the patients with a patient with Parkinson's. As far as the gait is concerned, you don't necessarily have to use a wheeled walker. You can use a standard walker, but that's very difficult because of the freezing episodes. So if they tend to have freezing episodes, that would not be a device of choice. Very often they'll start with a straight cane or a quad cane and move on up to a wheeled walker. But really a patient could have Parkinson's for 20, 25 years and still be ambulatory past that point. As far as any wheelchair concerns for a patient with Parkinson's disease, it would be a good option to not have the rounded, all the slumpy slump business here and here. It would be good to figure out a way to get a cushion in the chair so that there was a board underneath to help that patient to be sitting flat, because the last thing they need is to be sitting in a wheelchair and be all rotated in. That makes everything smaller still. And you're sitting here, and so you're rounded here, and that makes everything smaller still. So trying to get that patient up and out is good. Activities on the mat table, when they're able to do that, putting some type of a shelving unit in front of them and having some activities here where they have to put things onto a shelf. That's what they would need to do at home anyway, and so we're going to put the cans up on the shelf. So to have them come down and reach for a can and come up, they're going to get a weight shift, and they're going to do reaching and get away from their center core. So any kind of activities like that would be beneficial as well. And then activities too with the lower extremities. You can always put spots on the floor. They're supported in their walker, they're supported in the parallel bars, and they have to reach out and touch the toe on those different spots. That'd be something that you can do. You can do some standing activities and just work on getting them up straight. Have their hands just over the walker or over the parallel bar so that they're not really using them. And they've got to have that postural awareness. They've got to be up and straight posturally to be able to do a whole lot with the lower extremities on one leg. So later on in the progression, it would be a little bit more difficult for that patient to do, but early on, they should be able to do it. course, with the Parkinson's patient, they're going to be overstretched with the muscles of the back, and that hurts, that's sore, that hurts. And so those muscles are going to be good for nothing. They're going to be overstretched, and so they're not going to be very strong. So working on trying to do some contraction with those muscles so that those muscles are getting used will help. And at the same time, that's going to affect positively the muscles in the front, which need to be stretched out. The muscles in the front, just because they're tight doesn't mean they're strong. So that patient's going to need strengthening both in the back and in the front, with stretching of the muscles in the front anteriorly and strengthening of the muscles behind. And it's difficult, it's painful to be flexed here, and it's also painful to be extended too much here, because we're just meant to be balanced, and that's going to be a lot more comfortable for the patient.
Would it be appropriate to maybe stretch some tape, like for this walker specifically, stretch some tape through those support bars to give them something to touch their knee to as they're walking?
Sure, that's
Just
good
to
idea.
make, because that would kind of cause them to
Tactile.
become more upright as well. Because if they're flexed, they've got to reach a lot farther with their leg to reach the tape. And yeah, they've got the tactile feedback, just something for them to touch, and then they don't have to watch their feet. Right, but they don't have to watch it because they can feel it touch, and if they don't feel it touch, it's not too far.
Well, they look down a lot anyway.
Yeah.
They
What about
look
the
down a lot
balloons?
anyways, but if you cue them, sometimes they'll look down and then look back up. Like I have these vinyl feet that kind of stick to the floor, and they're all different colors, and they have different textures on them and stuff. And you can set the feet down and have them walk on the feet. So then you're worried, well, you're going to be looking down the whole time, and you're never going to look up. Well, if you cue them to do so, I want you to see where the feet are so that you can take big steps, but I still want you to look up and see where you're going. You're going to crash into something. So, yeah, anything that tactile or visual cues for them to take longer steps is going to be helpful. And it really does help the patient with Parkinson's, especially if they really work on this on their own. If they're not really addressing any of this and they just come to therapy a couple of times a week and don't carry through, then they're not going to do as well. But if they carry through on all the things, little hints that you suggest, it's good. So we talk about the neuro patient and bringing everything in close, so like in the kitchen, so it's easy for them to reach. You really want to be kind of the opposite with the patient with Parkinson's, because you want them to do that reaching.
Not so
And,
compensatory.
Put that stuff on the back of the top shelf of your refrigerator so that you need to be reaching for it, and that's going to help you to keep more mobile. So all of those are important considerations too. And we talked about how everything is changing, and they're kind of finding some activities that can be very helpful with Parkinson's, like the dancing and the boxing and the biking. And I think that is so exciting that they are able to do those kinds of activities and then have more mobilized type movements during the day, that they're able to be more active, because all of those Parkinson's patients that were taking part in the dancing were really quite high functioning otherwise, except for the poor fellow that was so sick and had had the aneurysm. Many of them were, living in their own home and keeping house and that kind of thing. So
He had a lot of comorbidities.
what's that?
He had a lot of comorbidities,
Yeah,
and that slowed him down.
yeah, he did. Any questions so far about ALS and what you would do to treat an ALS patient or a patient that has Parkinson's disease so far? Okay.